There's been a ton of storylines over the 2023 NASCAR season that have taken the headlines. Recently, it's been Ross Chastain being Ross Chastain. Others have been the next-gen car, the racing, the ratings. Good or bad, there's been a lot of different stories that people have focused on a ton. But I feel like one that's went under the radar has been the comeback, or at least uptick in performance, by RFK. RFK is one of the long-standing teams that's since had to go through a few changes over time and adapt, but it is still a mainstay that many NASCAR fans would love to see do better. So we're going to get right into all of this, what happened before, leading up to it, and just how much they're doing better and why it's honestly pretty good for the sport. But really quick, I want to remind you all, NASCAR Weekly Podcast is on tonight on Danny P. Talks channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to be talking about a ton of different stuff tonight. But let's get into the here and now with what's going on with Roush. But I think we have to go back. You see, Roush has been considered almost dead for a long time. It is one of those NASCAR teams that was at the top of the world, the pinnacle of NASCAR racing in the 90s and early 2000s. But since then has joined the likes of Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, or RCR, as teams that ran up front, competed for championships, and now are either irrelevant or, in DEI's case, gone in NASCAR today. In 2003, they won a championship with Matt Kenseth, the last of the consistent Winston Cup Lapford system point standings. In 2004, they turned around with young driver Kurt Busch and won the first chase for the Nextel Cup. In 2005, all five of them, as has been said so often when comparing Roush now compared to then, was in the chase, the original iteration of the playoffs. And in 2006, 2008, and 2011, Roush had runners-up and also drivers who were up front competing for the championship year in and year out, whether it be guys like Matt Kenseth or Carl Edwards or Greg Biffle or even Mark Martin towards the end of his tenure at Roush. And it really was a team that all of us looked at and said year in and year out, that is Ford's team. Now it's seemingly been replaced by Penske, where Penske is the Ford team and Roush, or in this case RFK now, has been left by the wayside. And since the 2000s, since 2009 in particular, they had 5 cars, but due to NASCAR rules, had to downsize to 4 in 2010. It didn't seem like something too out of the ordinary, though. Every team was at 4 teams now, and Roush just had to adapt over time. But then, in 2012, they downsized again to 3. Still, they had great drivers who were competing for wins and championships, like Matt Kenseth and Carl Edwards and Greg Biffle, until Kenseth left into 2013. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. takes up his place, and then in between 2014 and 15, Carl Edwards leaves. And in that time, in 2015, you see them downsize a bit again in at least performance. And by the end of the 2010s, they're sitting at 2 cars for their team, where they once sat at 5 only about a decade prior. The lineups of champions like Kenseth and Busch, as well as Hall of Famers like Martin, Edwards, and Biffle, had went to guys like Stenhouse, Trevor Bayne, Ryan Newman at the end of his career when he was much slower than he was in the 2000s or even early 2010s, or Chris Buescher, or now a Brad Keselowski, though we'll get into Buescher and Keselowski in a bit because that's a bit of a different story. The deal at hand is that over time, while Roush had great moments, while guys like Carl Edwards later on in his tenure there would win, while Ricky Stenhouse Jr. had wins with the team, and while other drivers had flash-in-the-pan runs where they would look the part that Roush usually would, the general overarching storyline was that Roush was tumbling without control. There was no way that the once Ford juggernaut, the team that had 5 cars and seemed unstoppable, was now turning into a team that was an afterthought. It was running behind Ford teams like Front Row Motorsports, and no disrespect to them, but they're not the ones of the pedigree of Roush. But the 2020s came along, and a bit has changed since then. I talked about Buescher earlier. He's jumped on with the team, and while he has not set the world on fire in any way, Buescher has been a solid, capable driver, and it seems like, starting with him, the team kind of tapered off their downturn. It leveled off, which was a welcome change from the past 10 to 15 years. And then you bring on the RFK deal. RFK stands for Roush-Fenway-Keselowski Racing, a very giant word jumble up of a team name, but it is representative of a new era for Roush. Jack Roush isn't getting any younger. He is, like many car owners in NASCAR, very old, and he needs the next generation to step up in his place. And the Fenway Group also doesn't have one particular person leading that charge. So in comes Brad Keselowski, who took a huge chance after running competitively for well over a decade at Penske to try and turn around Roush and have a bit of an ownership stake in the sport. Ultimately, at least from what it looks like, ensuring that Roush will last longer into the future, even after Jack Roush is gone. And that was really the big selling point of it. This was Roush changing into the future, where other teams like Hendrick had Jeff Gordon jump in, or Petty, now Legacy, has Jimmy Johnson jump in, among a host of other different car owners and people who are trying to rejuvenate and add young blood to the car owner scene. This was Roush's way of keeping up with the competition. And with it, Brad Keselowski fully, like I said, bought in, put his full faith behind Buescher. And in 2022, they had a very rough year. There were some bright spots, though, but overall, the year was very rough to look at. For Brad Keselowski in particular, it was probably the worst season of his career since 2010, when he was the first time in his career a full-time Cup driver, this time in the number 12 for Team Penske. He only had 1 top 5 and 6 top 10s on the year with 4 DNFs and a 19th place average finish. But the thing is, that doesn't necessarily say just where he ran. There were a lot of races where Keselowski would run all right in the teens, but there also were a lot of races he was sub 20th just off pure speed. It was jarring to see after him competing for championships was the norm for so long. And an early season penalty torpedoed the season as he lost 100 points and was put in a must-win situation from the get-go instead of being able to slowly get into more and more competitive cars through the year and have strategies to keep up via points. So it was really a season that by week 5 was set up to lose for Keselowski. Now for Chris Buescher, it's a bit different. Buescher had 6 DNFs in 2022, and all of them were due to crashes. He had 3 top 5s, though, and 10 top 10s, so honestly, with how Roush had been, that was not bad. It was a real big improvement from what Roush had been putting up with guys like Stenhouse and Bain. And he did also lead 169 nice laps at the Bristol night race en route to a win. So there was speed starting to be shown, and towards the end of the season especially, both the 17 and the 6, while not getting all the results for it, would end up running up front more and led a lot of people to hope that they would do well into the 2023 season. So how have they done so far? Well, 2023 for me is still a very odd season, just as 2022 was, but RFK has probably been the most improved team year over year. Visibly, they look much quicker on the track. While Buescher is not still running in the top 5 on a regular basis, he's still running in that kind of 9th to 15th place range. He is able to keep up with a lot of teams that in years past, the 17 had no shot at keeping up with. And at this point, he does have 2 top 5s and 4 top 10s in only 11 races. So keep this up through the season, and he's on track for a career year. He's 12th in points, definitely in the playoffs at the moment, and has ran in the top 15 mostly all year with only 1 DNF from a crash at Atlanta. Brad Keselowski has 2 top 5s and 5 top 10s so far this year and sits 9th in the standings. He is, at the moment, a lock for the playoffs as long as there's not some big collapse. It's not the whole story of it, though. He's ran fast and had issues or bad luck a ton of times. He's been one of the fastest consistently out there, and while not having top 5 speed a lot, he has had around 6th to 10th place speed. He's had the ability that if things go right to compete for wins, and he probably should have closer to 8 top 10s in the first 11 races instead of 5. Ultimately, if they clean this stuff up, I think that RFK probably won't be a championship contender, but could get at least one of their drivers into the final 8 and into the final round before the championship this year. But I don't want to jump the gun too much. We saw Legacy last year as Petty GMS end up pretty fast. The 43 especially looked really good with Eric Jones, and so far this year, that team has been MIA as Legacy. It's not good, and it makes the 2022 speed that they had look like a blip. Now, they did not have the same rise up that RFK has had, as it seems like they've started to build a little bit year over year. And if they continue that into 2024, we could really legitimately talk about Roush being a championship contender into the middle of the 2020s. And that would be the first time that they'd be able to do that, honestly, since about 2012. So that's big. That's really big and would change the complexion of the NASCAR Cup Series on a competitive level. Now with that, I want to ask what you think. Do you think RFK is on the up and up again? Or do you think this is a blip in a pretty negative graph? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support, and until next time, have a good one.